Hi, in this series of videos, we will talk about plane geometry. I'm not going to assume any prerequisite knowledge. We will build everything from scratch and eventually deal with topics covered in a typical high school geometry class and also develop some strategies to attack problems in middle and high school math competitions like math counts, AMCs, math kangaroo, and so on. So without much further ado, let's get into plane geometry. A fundamental concept in plane geometry is that of an angle. And intuitively, you might know what an angle is. You can use a protractor to measure an angle. But what is an angle? So let's look at this picture where we are given two rays. So you might have two rays that meet at an angle, that meet at some point. Then angle between these two rays measures how much rotation we need to go from one to the other. So we have to rotate this in this direction so that it arrives here. And we generally use Greek letters like theta to denote an angle. So let's go ahead and try to answer this question. So in figure 1, you're given two pictures. So you can see that the one on the left requires more rotation than the one on the right. So alpha is going to be more than beta. Now, if you want to know exact values, you have to use a protractor, but just for the sake of comparison, we can visually see that alpha is going to be bigger than beta. We used a word, we said ray. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about it. So what is a ray? A ray is something that has a starting point, but it has no end point. It goes on forever. And something that goes on forever, in math, we use an arrow to denote that it never stops. It goes on forever. Now, there are two other related words. One is called line, and a line is something that has neither a starting point nor an end point, which means we need arrows on both ends. And then there's one other related word, it's called line segment. And as the name suggests, it's a part of a line, which means it starts somewhere and ends somewhere. It has both starting and ending point. So ray, line, and line segment. And one thing I want to tell you that these have to be straight. They cannot be curved. So these are the three related words. Now, if we say that an angle is formed between two rays, they could be formed between two line segments or between two lines. So now that we have defined or we talked a little bit about angle, let's discuss some special angles. So some angles are going to be special. They have their own terms. And here is the first one. If you have an angle that is formed between two rays that point in exactly opposite directions, then this is called a straight angle. So what is a straight angle? Let's go ahead and write it down. A straight angle will look like this. One ray, if it points to the right, the other ray will point to the left. But they both will be along this straight line. That's why it's called a straight angle. And you might already know that this is 180 degrees. 180 degrees is called straight angle. So it requires us to rotate if this is your first ray, then you have to rotate it in such a way that it points in the opposite direction. And another special angle is where the rotation is not as much as that, but only half as much. So if this is your first ray, you're not rotating it all the way in the opposite direction, but you stop at exactly half the value. And half of 180 degrees is 90 degrees. And 90 degrees angle has a special symbol. We use this square box to denote a 90 degrees angle. And it's called a right angle. All right, so straight angle is 180 degrees, right angle is half of it, which is 90 degrees. Now, when the angle is not 90 degrees, but less. So if this is our first ray, and if we rotate less than 90 degrees, so angles such as 45, 60, anything less than 90 degrees is called an acute angle. An angle that is between 90 and 180 degrees, which means it's more than 90 but less than 180 degrees. It's going to look like this. So the rotation here is more than 90 degrees but less than 180 degrees. This is called an obtuse angle. So these are some special angles. Now let's switch gears and talk about lines. In particular, we want to talk about these two special lines called horizontal and vertical. So what are those lines? Well, a horizontal line goes in the left and right direction. Remember, a line is something that goes in both directions, and horizontal goes in the left and right direction. A vertical line goes in the up and down direction. So that's the definition of horizontal and vertical lines. Now coming back to angles, there are again some terminology. So here is something, I have two angles like 30 degrees and 150 degrees. These two add up to 180 degrees. And similarly 90 degrees and 90 degrees, they add up to 180 degrees. So when you have two angles that add up to 180 degrees, they are called supplementary angles. So what are supplementary angles? Two angles that add up to 180 degrees. And then one is called the supplement of the other. So 30 degrees is a supplement of 150 degrees and vice versa. And notice 90 degrees is its own supplement. Now there is one other term that applies when two angles add up to 90 degrees. So what is an example of that? 30 degrees, 60 degrees. These two add up to 90 degrees. Then 80 degrees, 10 degrees. And 45 degrees, 45 degrees. So in this pair, two angles add up to 90 degrees and they have a special name as well. They are called complementary angles. And then one is called the complement of the other. So 30 degrees is called the complement of 60 degrees and vice versa. So there is some terminology related to angles, and there is one other there's some more terminology. And here is what I want to show you. So if you look at this figure, you have a straight line and then some other line intersects this straight line and forms two angles. So notice a straight angle is 180 degrees, which means in this figure, these two angles, gamma and delta, they add up to 180 degrees. So definitely these are supplementary angles. But in this case, they also have a name. It's called linear pair. So linear pair is something where you have two angles that have a common line. So all linear pairs are going to be supplementary. So that's what the next term is. And then there is something called vertical angles. And it's best described by a picture. Whenever two lines intersect, like here, as in figure 5, in an X like that, then these two angles, they are going to be equal and they are called vertical angles. And you can see why these two are equal. So if you were to, you can try to prove it yourself. If you look at this particular angle, then each of these is a supplement of this angle. And I think we'll stop here in this video. In the next video, we will begin with parallel lines.